Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show. So, top story of today is the story that everyone knows, which is that President Donald Trump and his wife Melania have both tested positive for COVID-19. According to the Washington Post, President Trump was flown to Walter Reed National Military Center on Friday evening, a day after he and his wife Melania received positive coronavirus tests. The president may remain in the hospital for several days out of an abundance of caution, said an aide who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the president's health. The official stressed that Trump is not seriously ill, but said that because of his age, as well as other risk factors, he and aides decided to take this additional step. Prior to the president's departure, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany shared an update from the president's doctor in a tweet. As of this afternoon, the president remains fatigued but in good spirits, White House physician Sean Conley wrote in a memo. Officials with knowledge of the president's health said his condition had worsened Friday, though they maintained he was in good spirits. The president has a low-grade fever, a cough, and nasal congestion, among other symptoms, two people familiar with his condition said. Trump revealed he and his First Lady had contracted COVID-19 by tweet overnight, and he suspended campaign events with just 4 weeks until Election Day, and after months in which he often played down the global coronavirus pandemic. Trump, 74, was diagnosed hours after it became publicly known that Hope Hicks, a top Trump aide who traveled with him on Air Force One and Marine One this week, tested positive for the virus Thursday morning. Tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19, the president tweeted just before 1 a.m. on Friday. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. According to the Daily Mail, Trump waved to reporters on the South Lawn but didn't speak as he walked to Marine One. He walked on his own with no help. Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was with him, also wearing a mask. Several senior White House staffers, including Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, were on the lawn to watch the president's departure. He walked slowly down the stairs of Marine One when he arrived at the hospital grounds after the 15-minute journey, holding onto the handrail as he descended. He got into a waiting motorcade for the short ride to the hospital, where he will be admitted into the presidential suite. In a video message posted to Twitter, the president thanked the American people for their support following his diagnosis. I want to thank everyone for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing well, but we're going to make sure things work out, he said in the 18-second clip. On Friday evening, Eric Trump tweeted that his father is a true warrior and asked Americans to join me in praying for his recovery. He will fight through this with the same strength and conviction that he uses to fight for America each and every day, Eric wrote. I ask you to join me in praying for his recovery. I've never been more proud of someone and what they have had to endure. Earlier today, Trump's physician said he was treated with a single dose of Regeneron's experimental polyclonal antibody cocktail. He added that the president was fatigued, but in good spirits. According to Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who is a former White House physician, he told the Kyle Olson Show that both Trumps were asymptomatic. Breitbart News has since reported Trump is showing mild symptoms. Jackson said that Trump does not have heart disease, lung disease, or any other condition that would put him at risk. He said 99.5% of everyone in that age category will recover from this spontaneously, adding that most people will not get any symptoms. I fully expect this to resolve itself in the next 7 to 10 days, Jackson said. You remember I was talking about super spreaders the other day and how they are top of the charts as far as villains are concerned. One gets the impression that there are people out there who want these super spreaders to be identified, hunted down, and then, well, you know. Dylan Gwynn at Breitbart, if you're looking for someone to show an ability to sense the moment, show class, maturity, and some sense of empathy for those with whom they disagree, you should probably avoid looking at Jamel Hill's Twitter account. And She tweeted, for those scoring at home, the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, I continue to shake hands. Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, it's just a little flu. The United States, Donald Trump, this is their new hoax. Yeah, he didn't call coronavirus a hoax. This is one of the many lies about Trump, which the media insists on repeating, despite the fact that it has been debunked many, many times. Hill said, I respect the people who don't think now is the time to remind the president of his response to coronavirus, but thousands have been badly hurt by his indifference and neglect. People still have a right to be angry. Again, the question comes up, given that the United States is a federalist state, and dealing with the coronavirus is mostly, almost exclusively, up to the governors. What would Trump have done differently that would have made any difference? I mean, apart from his shaking his fist at the virus and threatening to take it outside so you'll know what it's like. His indifference, Trump has not been indifferent to COVID-19, and this much is obvious, even to a dimwit like Hill. Holding daily press conferences with two doctors, including Dr. Fauci, next to him, does not really smack of indifference. Hill then called the president a super spreader. So the president is potentially a super spreader. Unbelievable. Yes. Okay, he's a super spreader, it seems. What does Jim Kunstler have to say? The New York Times almost wet its panties, breaking the pre-dawn news that the president has tested positive for coronavirus. By the end of day, Democrats across the land, or at least up and down the east and west coast, will be gathering into Santeria shrines, lighting MAGA hats on fire, sacrificing chickens, drawing Wiccan pentangles in the moonlight, and entreating all the other unseen powers of Providence to rapture Trump into everlasting oblivion somewhere beyond the Crab Nebula. The Judeo-Christian God of our fathers must have a special animus for the golden golem of greatness. He, she, it, or they have heaped more tribulation on Trump than on the biblical job of Uz, anguishing in Yahweh's holy whirlwind. Russiagate, Very Fine Peoplegate, Ukrainegate, Boltongate, and now this. It typically takes about 4 days for COVID-19 symptoms to present. So early next week, sometime the world will know if the bug made the president sick or if he shook it off like just another impeachment effort. The ordeal will also be an interesting test of the hydroxychloroquine plus zinc regimen Trump says he's been on. The joyful hysteria in the mainstream news is so boisterous this morning that the Times hasn't even played its obvious next card, which I guarantee you will be an effort to postpone the hearings over Scottish nominee Amy Coney Barrett on account of coronavirus being on the loose among government officials. I'm pretty sure that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will keep a firm hand on the tiller of that ship. Even if the darn proceeding has to go full Zoom meeting, they will get her done, as we say in deplorable land. If the virus doesn't knock Trump on his ass, I imagine we'll be seeing quite a lot of him campaigning by video in quarantine, old game show performer that he is. I wouldn't even rule out some updated Oval Office versions of The Apprentice, with the president taking the opportunity to dismiss a few of the seditionists still lurking in government. Gina Haspel, you're fired. Christopher Wray, you're fired. Michael Horowitz, take a hike. General Mark Milley, you're busted to corporal. Remember, the old Chinese word for crisis, wei ji, means a combo of danger and opportunity. Or, as Homer Simpson once said, crisis-tunity. Of course, there are small but real odds that the disease could make Trump very ill or even launch him up to that great boardroom in the sky. What then? Does Veep Mike Pence carry on in his place, or do the Trump forces in the GOP bring in Rick Grenell or Johnny Ratcliffe as an emergency candidate for president? Just as in the case of mass mail-in voting, this is a scenario the country hasn't run before. Technically, Trump's 2-week quarantine will be over by October 15th, just in the nick of time for the second debate with Joe Biden. But old White Joe is sure to demur on that meetup for reasons of virus exposure risk. though his peeps seem less than eager for round two even before last night's announcement of the president's positive test. If that happens and the president comes through his infection in good shape, then Biden will be seen as a weakling, while technically he is on cognitive grounds, apart from his inherent character deformities. The focus in days ahead surely will be on Trump's medical condition, but there's plenty more action in the offing as October rolls out. There's the aforementioned Amy Coney Barrett Scottish business. There are new rumblings out of John Durham's office just in the past few days that something consequential may be up there, and then there is the stalemate on a coronavirus relief bill in Congress. The latter matter hints at the catastrophe lurking in the background of the election, the stupendous mass bankruptcy of unemployed or laid-off middle-class people whose rent and mortgage payment holidays will eventually run out. Not to mention car payments and all the other overdue, usual rotating bills each household must pay to stay above water. After half a year of lockdowns, millions are on the brink of financial ruin. Of all the things that have made Americans anxious and hysterical this year, this horror of middle-class financial ruin has not quite expressed itself overtly in the public arena, at least not in the streets. For sure, the Antifas and BLM mobs have been active, looting, burning, and smashing things up, but many of these are unemployables, and the ones burdened with college debt may be counting on Democrat promises of a jubilee on that. The foundering middle class may be the people most sympathetic to Trump and Trumpism. You can't sell them on the identity politics nonsense that has become the Dems' stock in trade. Laid-off airline pilots, hairstylists, and insurance adjusters are probably not interested in critical race theory, gender dysphoria, reimagining law enforcement, ableism, and the trials of the neurodiverse, the latest term of art for the mentally ill. They may also catch a whiff of yet deeper economic calamity in the Democrats' relish for more lockdowns, and even in the promised universal basic income schemes that would pay the able-bodied to not work. The question for this large group is how many will swap their liberty for the very sketchy and conditional security of a woke nanny state that requires strict obedience to whatever crazy crusade it thinks up next. There's your true friction point in the current disposition of things. People used to being busy, productive, and independent might feel a mighty resentment about becoming that kind of society, and they may fight over it. At least they'll turn out to vote. Maybe they will do both. Let's go to the chat, see what's happening there. Pray for the dawn, says Hikma Warrior. Yes, I have, and I think that we all should. British American says, why inject weird, unproven cocktails? He's probably asymptomatic anyway, but they'll kill him with the cocktails. Why would Trump allow this? Well, you know, Trump, he has the best doctors, as I'm sure he would say. YT, when will we have a break from bad news? Wishing DT and Melania to recover quickly. Bad news for the moment. This may end up as good news. That is to say, if Trump recovers fully in the next 13 days, then for one thing, it will disprove the strange notion put out by the media that everyone who gets COVID-19 dies. Now, I've recited the figures to you. Those who infected with COVID, or at least tested positive for it, survival rate, under 20, 99.999, 20 to 30, 99.98, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's only when you get to people over 70 that you get a survival rate of 94.6%. Again, the contrast with Biden couldn't be more clear because Biden is clearly absolutely petrified of getting the COVID-19 virus. I suppose because of belief that if he does, then he will die. Walrus Libertarian, Proud Boys sending Trump their thoughts and prayers from under the bus. Yes, this is a reference to Trump condemning them. Hikma Warrior says, may their gloating boomerang 1,000-fold. Jim Bowden says, hi, KMG, 9 a.m. Saturday morning. Here in Australia, drinking coffee and enjoying your stream as always. Keep up the good quality show. Well, thank you. Chogokin666 says, at least it's not herpes. That could be a reference to a tweet I made shortly before this live stream began of angry idiot actor Michael Rappaport raving as usual. And there was a very large sore on his lower lip, suggesting a herpes lesion. Jay Smith, British American. Trump is a normie, believes in viruses and other unprovable myths. Hikma Warrior says, could it have been intentionally spread by a libtard vector? I have heard that suggested. But of course, Michael Moore and others are suggesting that he is faking it. In these times, this doesn't surprise me that people are suggesting both. Chad Chadson says, Trump needs to set up a YouTube channel and do live streams, not between 4 and 6 p.m., though. Let's talk about assassination. Look, as Michael Moore pointed out, there's an enormous wave of sympathy for Trump and his wife because of this. And again, if he survives this, and is the same man as before, he's going to assume an even more superhuman quality amongst his supporters than he does already. Hikma Warrior says Bolsonaro got a boost from the assassination attempt a while back. Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't recall when Reagan was shot back, in 1982, and he was close to death. And then later he had, surgery for, prostate cancer. I don't recall this level of hysteria. But again, these are heightened times. The Russians are canceling their boy. Run with that, Temps. Okay. Joel Gerke says, if he does die, strictly speaking, there is not a 199 out of 200 likelihood that the death was not caused by COVID-19. Add to the sheer math the exquisite convenience of the timing. What does Nancy Pelosi have to say? Well, I think you can guess. Late Thursday night, Nancy Pelosi said in a Friday interview on MSNBC Live, offered her well wishes and prayers for a successful bout with the virus for the first family. But masks. This kind of changes the dynamic because here they see the reality of what we've been saying all along. What? We have a running death toll, which is on all the channels, which is constantly repeated. No one is disputing this reality. Of course, there is a dispute as to whether a large number of the people who supposedly have died from COVID have died of it. And that dispute is not going to go away. Here's what Pelosi says. This is a vicious virus. No. Vicious is that which proceeds from vice. And COVID-19 is not sentient. It is not human. It's not human. Only people can be vicious. And it spreads, as the president has known from the start, but as has been revealed, it's airborne. Yeah. It's not just about touching an arm thing on a plane. It's airborne, and that makes it more dangerous. I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. We always have to find a path. That is our responsibility to do so, and I believe that we will. Hopefully this enlightenment will have them say, wear your mask, do your distancing, wash your hands, testing, tracing, treatment, so that we can crush this vicious virus, not only in our own country, but throughout the world. You see, it's just a question of willpower, according to Nancy Pelosi. Chris Wallace of Fox News, who was under a lot of fire because of handling of the debate, he said that the lesson from Trump's positive coronavirus was wear the damn mask. Yeah, okay. There's no evidence that masks work. I'll just leave it at that for now. Okay. Oh, and Ana Navarro who apparently is from Nicaragua. I don't know whether you know this or not, but Ana Navarro is from Nicaragua, and she's a proud Nicaraguan, but American by choice. That certainly breeds confidence in her. I always think that she's going, whenever I see Ana Navarro and hear her talk, I always imagine that she's going to start carrying on about cashmere, about a cashmere sweater once worn by an American in Nicaragua, and how she begged for this cashmere sweater, but instead he just threw some coins at her and went away. Very, very sad. Very, very sad story. Chris Lemon. And I'm looking at a picture of Chris Lemon here, and I asked myself the question, how did a man this stupid get to be on television, and this ignorant as well? And then, yes, of course, I know how. He's a twofer. That's how he got to be on television. Oh, and he's using one of the words of the year. He asked a network chief medical correspondent, Sanjay Gupta, to speculate if this might be a moment of, wait for it, reckoning. Ooh. Okay. Still think it's a hoax, Mr. President? That's not what he said. It's from the Daily Mail. Internet gloats after Donald Trump and wife Melania reveal they have coronavirus. Memes have flooded social media showing Trump gulping down on a bottle of bleach and a red MAGA-style hat with the words, "It is what it is" on the front. Well, it is what it is. It is a virus, and it is not susceptible to coercion, you cretins. Let's see, many Twitter users mocked the president's infamous suggestion that people could cure themselves by ingesting cleaning products, mocking up pictures of Trump knocking back a bottle of bleach. Others, including celebrities such as Sophia Bush and Zach Braff, Evelyn Waugh was often criticized for the names he gave his American characters in his novels. He went too far, they said. And then when I saw Zach Braff, I thought, no, one cannot go too far in that regard. Trump's remark that the death toll is what it is also attracted dark humor, including, yes, okay. And apparently there's an is what it is hat. Yes, Trump actually, he seriously suggested that people drink bleach. No, of course he didn't. Of course he didn't. And yes, Steve Harvey laughing because we all love Steve Harvey, beloved figure. Is he? Can't die of COVID if you kill yourself. Oh yes, is this a meme? Yes, and it's a bottle of Lysol. Many commentators saw the Trump's infection as karma after the president, by his own admission to Bob Woodward, minimized the threat of the disease. Well, yes, as I pointed out before, Trump did exactly the same thing with COVID-19 that Franklin Delano Roosevelt did with the Depression, famously saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And this is commonly cited as an example of Roosevelt's wisdom and greatness as a national leader. So, yeah, okay. Oh, many shared a sick image from The Simpsons showing Trump in a casket. Now, I suppose the right could be accused of hypocrisy here because of all the gloating about Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying. Well, there was some gloating, no question about that. I don't recall very many people, certainly not a multitude, openly calling for her death. I certainly don't recall that. But when I see all of these people gloating that Trump is supposedly going to die, and this is, yes, I want him to die horribly, people are saying, why exactly? That's a serious question. Okay, so he's a political enemy. All right, but what exactly has he done? Has he established a dictatorship in the United States? Has he set up concentration or death camps? Has he shut down the New York Times and the Washington Post? Has he had Rachel Maddow dragged off in chains? No, none of that has happened. Oh, he's keeping children in cages, is he now? He's actually following the same policy regarding children, migrant children, as George W. Bush and Barack Obama, but they don't tell you that. Bette Midler, boy, we're hearing a lot from her lately, said she was also suspicious of the diagnosis and says she believes Trump may be trying to get out of debating rival Joe Biden. Tom Arnold was also criticized for sharing the telephone number of Hope Hicks, Trump's personal advisor, who was also diagnosed with the virus. Oh, and again, more from Zach Braff. What exactly did Bette Midler say? Just learned that Hope Hicks tested positive for COVID. Timing so interesting. I guess Trump's quarantining will mean no rallies and no more debates. Convenient. It's awful to always think the worst, but after 4 years of relentless lying, can't be helped. No trust left. Michael Moore said, there's one absolute truth about Trump. He is a consistent, absolute, unrelenting, fearless, and professional liar, a serial liar, a factually proven liar. How many lies now has the Washington Post proven in these 4 years? 25,000, at least twice during every waking hour. Again, the president makes claims, say, for instance, this is the most robust American economy in history. There are various ways to measure that, to interpret that. This is not what is commonly understood to be a lie. But again, these are heightened times. Why would Tom Arnold share Hope Hicks' cell phone number? I know he's a jerk, but why specifically? Comedian Billy Eichner, again, physiognomy is real. Take a look at this man's face. He's obviously a very nasty person indeed. He went to a fundraiser with his own supporters without a mask, knowing he was exposed. I can't get over it. Oh, former figure skating champion Adam Rippon also said he was screaming out loud that Trump has the hoax virus. I guess, why are we listening to celebrities? Because they're the bestest people on earth? Because they demonstrate with their lives their nobility of purpose? Is that why it is? Or is it because the media has destroyed normal life and that we are encouraged, better to say coerced, into regarding people that we don't know and will never know as somehow being more important, say, than our own families? Okay. From the Daily Mail, you might remember Dominic West from The Wire. He played a troubled, alcoholic detective, like all the other cops on TV. He's actually British. How vile and evil to get joy from the suffering of others. Good Morning Britain viewers slammed Dominic West for telling Kate Garraway he jumped for joy over Trump's COVID diagnosis, despite her husband Derek battling the disease. The actor's words were somewhat tone deaf, given Kate's husband, Derek Draper, 53, has become the longest patient battling coronavirus in hospital in the UK. Tone deaf. What the president of the Ford Foundation made a groveling, sickening apology for having used the phrase tone deaf. So use it while you can, people. Use it while you can. It's about to join what niggardly, I suppose, as one of those, it's bad adjacent. So we can't do that anymore. Okay, and we'll keep up the syllabus. Dune star Dave Bautista. Ooh, I'm looking at a picture of him. He doesn't really look fully formed. It's like that gag from Huxley's Brave New World that, they spilled the decanter. The Avengers and Dune star Dave Bautista said it's terrifying. The people who thought Donald Trump was a fascist yesterday are wishing the president well today after he tested positive for the coronavirus. What's really terrifying to me right now is that so many people who thought Trump was the fascist scourge of the earth yesterday are praying for him and wishing him a speedy recovery today. Imagine how his supporters and undecided voters are going to react. WTF, people. In another tweet, he said Trump has incited violence on so many levels. Name one. Name one. It's sickening. He lied to Americans and created a false sense of security, and people died. And of course, they wouldn't have died if Trump had said different things, presumably. He'd happily see one of his disciples gun down anyone who opposes him. He's the same person with or without COVID. I have zero sympathy for him. Oh, and then I never wished it on anyone, but it is what it is. I wonder how many COVID victims Trump has prayed for. Well, we know he's not the epitome of health and fitness. I'm guessing by his gimpy walk and his water drinking skills that he's got underlying conditions. So if President High Blood Pressure shows up in 2 weeks claiming COVID's like a bad cold, then something ain't right. What does he mean by that? I wonder. A bad cold or the flu for someone 74 years of age would be rather serious. He knows this, doesn't he? West Wing star Bradley Whitford, who is wearing ultra serious glasses here. He tweeted, whole bunch of our most vulnerable citizens, disproportionately communities of color, have been dying of this disease. Now that a white nationalist has it, maybe we'll take it seriously. Yes, and perhaps maybe one day Bradley Whitford will explain exactly what white nationalism means, because it doesn't really make any sense. Oh, the aforementioned Michael Rappaport, that is a very ugly looking thing on his lower lip. Looks like it's about to erupt. Left-wing actor Michael Rappaport unleashed a tirade over Trump's positive coronavirus test, saying, I'm not here to mock you or your wife, miserable Melania. This is a potentially deadly disease, especially for someone who's 74 and obese, you fat fuck. Yeah, okay. Wishing DKC Stain and miserable Melania a speedy recovery. You got this, guys. This is disruptive behavior, and I Am Rappaport is live and disruptive. And he's wearing something which is not, it's not a surgical mask, it's a piece of cloth over his lips and his nose, which is perhaps even worse than useless. I'm sure they'll put a presidential stamp on a ventilator for you, and if that doesn't work, a hydroxychloroquine. You said you were already taking hydroxychloroquine, which obviously doesn't work as a preventative, but maybe it'll work now. I don't know how that stuff works. If all that fails, Donald Trump, bleach it the F out. You inject the bleach into your skin, then you go into some warm light, maybe a tanning bed. I'm sure you have a tanning bed at the White House. You and Melania look like you're always tanned. Anyways, I'm wishing you well, and I'm just being sarcastic. Get well soon, Dick Stain F. A charming fellow he is. Oh, this is from Alana Mastrangelo at Breitbart. Twitter allowed wishes of death against President Donald Trump from its verified leftist users to stay on the platform Friday morning after the president announced that he and First Lady Melania Trump tested positive for the Chinese coronavirus. Twitter clearly states that, quote, hoping that someone dies as a result of a serious disease, unquote, is a violation of its platform's terms of service, but has not taken widespread action against its blue check users. There are a number of tweets listed here wishing death on Trump. And a couple of hours ago, I clicked through them all, and they were still up there on Twitter. It's been against my moral identity to tweet this for the past 4 years. Moral identity? Is this like gender now, that you identify morally in certain ways? But I hope he dies, tweeted Zara Rahim, a former national spokeswoman for Hillary Clinton's campaign and Obama White House staffer. The tweet was initially highlighted by conservative producer and director Robbie Starbuck. She deleted it, but of course, we've all learned to save these now. Here's the full statement from Twitter. Wishing, hoping, or calling for serious harm on a person or group of people. We prohibit content that wishes, hopes, promotes, or expresses a desire for death, serious and lasting bodily harm, or serious disease against an entire protected category or individuals who may be members of that category. This includes, but is not limited to, hoping that someone dies as a result of a serious disease, e.g., I hope you get cancer and die. I hope they both die, wrote California congressional candidate Steve Cox. And a bunch of rappers and such like. And yeah, let's get, you notice how many of these people are addicted to comic books, spandex movies, Star Wars, Spider-Man, etc., etc. Oh, and this is perhaps my favorite, from someone who calls himself the Anthony Fantano, the, Thee, like that twerking woman, Megan Thee Stallion from Texas. He describes himself as the internet's busiest music nerd, also a thick with 2 C's. He's really riding this black thing, isn't he? Vegan with the V, with a circle around it, anti-war, immature humorist, melon, best teeth in the game. So what did he have to say? Yeah, the irony of Trump catching a disease he let thousands and thousands of people die of is quite delicious. And of course, if Trump had simply sent out the special magic pills, which the White House has in the millions, nobody would have died of coronavirus. But Trump is such a meanie that he refused to do so. He locked his desk. And so even concerned White House staffers couldn't get to these magic pills. Even if I wasn't vegan, I wouldn't stop eating it. That's the delicious irony. Yeah. Hey, did you watch the big game last night? Did I tell you that I'm a vegan? Yes, about 10 times in the last hour. They just can't stop themselves. Let me tell you about veganism. No, thank you. Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. By the way, there are a great many people who have adopted vegetarianism and veganism, including a lot of celebrities who have quit because it was not good for their health. Any diet which requires you to take protein pills lest you become ill is clearly not a natural diet. Steve Saylor writes, will Trump derangement syndrome outlast Trump? From Eugene Robinson in the Washington Post, which was published at 12:34 p.m. yesterday. Imagine what it would be like to never have to think about Trump again. If you were like me and you watched Tuesday's debate with a voice in your head screaming, make it stop, take heart, we have the power to do just that. We can evict President Trump from the territory he has forcibly seized in our minds. Forcibly seized. Wow. He's got magic powers. He's a wizard. We must vote him out of our thoughts. Think of all the time and energy we all must presently devote to the outburst driven by Trump's bottomless appetite for attention. Imagine having that psychic burden lifted. Oh, wait, here we go. Here it comes. Doing so is exhausting. The Sisyphean psychic labor. Labor? It's not labor. You don't know what labor is. That drains the soul. Steve Saylor comments, similarly, nobody ever talks about Emmett Till anymore. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have documented that America appears to be undergoing a mental health crisis dating back to about the beginning of the Great Awakening around 2013, i.e. before Trump. My guess is that the tension generated by the increasingly crazy things you are supposed to believe in order to not get canceled by the woke is taking its toll. Trump has driven people even crazier by seeming to be immune to the requirements of polite society to be politically correct. But is Trump really just the Emmanuel Goldstein of the Great Awakening? Will the 2-minute hates be retired when Trump is no longer president? I don't know. A second question, what will political journalists do for clicks when Trump is gone? As reporters make this frantic effort to drive Trump from office, how many realize they are sending themselves to the unemployment lines? I don't think they think about things like that. I don't think that they, consider that all Trump, all the time, all hysteria might be souring people on the mainstream media. It could. It's a possibility. As well as them, how can I put this? Lying about everything. Lying about absolutely everything. Let's go back to the chat again. Oh, we've got some betting action going here. We've got lots of chat here. Lots of chat. KMG people gloated about RBG. Well, yeah, some people gloated. But as I say, I didn't see very many people actively calling for her death, or in particular, calling for her to die in suffering. Didn't see all that much about it. Alex DeLarge is back to blackpilling. He's now been deprived of town hall, his strongest format, and rallies for at least half the month. I am going to talk about the mayor of Chicago shortly. Okay. He's now, okay, we saw that already. Trump absolutely mused about inserting bleach into the body. He was being sarcastic, as he said during the debate. And I think that much is obvious. Leftists are getting smoked out by this. The few remaining leftists that have not been smoked out. I have to say that Alyssa Milano did not engage in this, which proves that she's smarter than a lot of these people. Okay. Okay, so talk about a $500 bet. Scotty Pimpin ATL says it's the apocalypse when Bette Midler, Tom Arnold, and Michael Moore are relevant in the media. I suppose if you ask people who Tom Arnold was, those people who actually knew who he was would say he's in politics, isn't he? He's an actor. He is? Oh, well, how come we only hear about him with regard to politics? Okay, Donald Robertson says the bad guys on the caravans was the media and Democrats. They were motivating Central Americans to bring children with them on a long, hard, and dangerous journey for the Democrats' ends. There's that, but there's also that this story was to a large extent made up. Are we seriously expected to believe that 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, because we saw them, we heard their stories, they walked, 1,200 miles to the U.S. border? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Okay. Jim Carrey as Biden will be the highlight of my weekend thus far, says Brandon Smith. I was trying to work up a Biden face, that sort of expression of panic with the, the Joker with the lips spread and just the insane 1,000-watt voltage from the eyes. It's not that far away from the cocaine look. You ever seen pictures of people when they're just zonked out on cocaine? They just have these incredibly mad, staring eyes. A lot of emojis in the chat for some reason. William Hicks says, I always like it when unexpected things happen like this. Trump getting COVID happened. You learn who is classy and who isn't. Ricardo Williams says, free Kyle, here. Okay. Okay, so talk about Michael Rappaport. I don't know about herpes, but Rappaport had crabs. He talked about it on Jon Favreau's old show. Why would people say that? Why would people say that? Because it's a message, perhaps a subliminal message to all the women out there, which is don't have sex with Michael Rappaport. Donald Robertson says Trump was probably playing down the virus at the request of the same elite that is now supporting a globalist insurrection through Antifa, BLM, and Soros's local elected leaders. Yeah. Trump may lose because of Dem cheating. That's a very real possibility. Well, Trump is well aware of it. And as I mentioned, I believe he alluded to it near the end of the debate. And I believe that he offered the Democrats a deal. Knock this off, call off the insurrection, and I won't indict all of you, because pretty much all of them could be indicted. Kids' movies for adults that never grew up. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about OnlyFans a little later, and I'll be talking about kids' movies. Stickers around today. Trump golfed while we died. Doesn't every president of the United States play golf? Every single one of them? Okay, and Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks also has Joker-like creases on her lips, says Hikmah Warrior. Okay, is KMG starting an OnlyFans? God. I don't think anyone needs that nightmare. Let's see. At Lockdown Skeptics, Will Jones writes, Boris Johnson's troubles are far from over as his skeptical backbenchers, emboldened by the concessions won over the Brady Amendment, move on to new targets. Their latest is the arbitrary and counterproductive 10 p.m. curfew, which is undermining an already battered hospitality industry. Oh, Matt Hancock says our strategy is to suppress coronavirus while protecting our economy. Good one, Matt. And education until a vaccine arrives. Well, Trump has been touting the vaccine. I am not touting the vaccine. Because why? How many different vaccines are there out there? Is there going to be a bake-off for the vaccines? And wouldn't that require, more delay? It's obvious that all caution has been thrown out the window by the FDA with regard to these vaccines. And I would be more worried about them sickening more people than they help, given this lack of caution. And we already have top people like Bill Gates saying, the vaccine probably only going to be 50 to 60% effective. So there were a number of MPs who voted against the Coronavirus Act renewal. But it's continuing. Dentists not open for business. Following our story yesterday about the difficulties people are having in getting diagnosed for serious medical condition in our world-beating national COVID service, despite Dr. Chris Whitty insisting the NHS is open for business, a reader has sent this letter that she sent to her MP. It says in the press, and according to the Prime Minister's press conference, that the NHS is open for business. I don't think it is. I've just called our dentist, and my 7-year-old can't be seen unless in extreme pain. She has a filling and a baby tooth, and I was told we needed to keep an eye on it and get it checked regularly, as the filling has a tendency to fall out. It is currently black, and I suspect it has fallen out. Now I'm told we cannot get an appointment. I have to wait to see if her tooth becomes severely rotten or she has an infection or some other serious problem before my 7-year-old can be seen by the dentist. So I beg to differ that the NHS is open for business. It seems a child could be at risk of serious illness before they might be seen. I do hope the situation isn't the same in hospitals. Well, dental infections cause very serious immunosuppression, which does lead to deaths. Herd immunity gaining ground. Well, that, of course, is good news. Oh, yes. In a new low, when you think universities couldn't be any crueler, the University of Southampton has decided to penalize an entire hall of residents, including those asleep at the time of the misdemeanor. A reader writes, a number of students from Chamberlain Halls decided to have a bit of a night out, breaking both government guidelines and the university's code of conduct. Of course, the university condemned this, but what was particularly shocking was the nature of their response. They issued a letter to the entire hall of residents, some 356 bedrooms, stating that all students would be receiving a permanent reference to the event on their disciplinary records. saying that even that those who did not attend would still receive one because they failed to snitch on their fellow students. Suffice to say, having a disciplinary record is no laughing matter. Collective punishment, gotta love it, right? The student body is outraged as many residents were completely unaware or even asleep at the time of the gathering as the hall sprawls across 5 separate blocks. Okay, see what Alex Berenson has to say. Let's refresh this. He's responding to a tweet from Ashish Jha, who tweeted, "President taken to Walter Reed concerning, but we need not speculate too much. On one hand, he is president, so clearly lower threshold for admitting him. Regular stats on hospitalized outcomes may not apply. However, speed of clinical change a bit concerning. Then if he was feeling well with normal oxygenation, no shortness of breath, etc., doubt his doctors would move him. So unlikely just abundance of caution thing. Let's wait for more data, but clearly an important development. Let's hope it turns around quickly." And Berenson comment, "This seems like a very reasonable take." Yeah. Oh, and in this episode of When Lesbian Cosplay Goes Bad, 2020 has been full of stories that are just not like improbable or wildly improbable, but frankly unbelievable. This is from Breitbart, but of course it was all over everywhere yesterday. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot has unveiled the coronavirus guidelines for safely celebrating Halloween in the city, all while dressed as Rona Destroyer. Yeah, she's got a mask and a cape and blue gloves, and she is at a podium which is decorated with pumpkins and fake spiders and fake spider webs. Lightfoot's remarks on the newly implemented rules for the season came on Thursday during a press conference where she entered wearing a red cape featuring the words Rona Destroyer, a black mask, and a laminated photo of Clorox wipes draped across her stomach. "This year, more than ever, it is important to celebrate Halloween safely and responsibly," Lightfoot said. Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady, a woman and not of American origin, clearly, and that is a trend. That's a trend. Attended the press conference dressed as a Rona Destroyer and provided health tips for celebrating Halloween safety. In accordance with wearing a mask, the city is asking residents who want to give out candy to leave a sign on the door or an outside light while keeping proper distance and providing hand sanitizer. Trick-or-treaters have also asked to travel in groups of 6 people or less and have been warned to not stick their hands into bowls of candy. The city also asks that trick-or-treaters wait until they are home to eat the candy. Yeah, you think that's going to happen? You're going to have all these people consuming. There's going to be a lot of hand sanitizer consumed in Chicago. In the announcement, the city made it clear that large or small house parties are not permitted and insisted that haunted house attractions should not operate. According to the Chicago Tribune, the city will also host what it calls Hallow Week activities, including programs in the Chicago Park District and Chicago Public Library. The Illinois Department of Public Health released guidelines for safely celebrating Halloween on Wednesday, which urged those who want to participate to stay at home. What? How is that? Okay. According to the department, those who want to trick-or-treat should travel with members of their household. The state guidelines also made it clear that masks should be worn by those giving out candy and trick-or-treating. Sounds like an awful lot of fun, doesn't it? Halloween is supposed to be scary, though, right? So this Halloween will be scary, legit. Let's have another look at the debate and the fallout from that, if anyone still cares about that. Oh, is this new from Michael Moore? My thoughts and prayers are with COVID-19. And here he is going like this. John Nolte writes at Breitbart, the demise of Fox News as an alternative to the establishment media marched on Thursday when both Chris Wallace and John Roberts exposed themselves as liars. Wallace and Roberts are not just anyone on Fox News, are not just your run-of-the-mill media liars. Wallace hosted Tuesday's presidential debate and hosts Fox News Sunday. Roberts is Fox's White House correspondent. So we're not talking about a liar like Donna Brazile, or fading anchors like Shep Smith and Neil Cavuto, or preening neurotics like Andrew Napolitano. How many homosexuals are in that group of four? Both of these liars hold positions of influence and power at Fox News, and this allowed Wallace to land the honor of moderating a full-blown presidential debate. Well, come on, John Nolte. He did the same thing 4 years ago. And look at what they're doing now. Look at how Wallace and Roberts are not only lying, but desperately looking to deceive and misinform the public. Look at how they're betraying the basic standards of journalism and integrity to peacock around their peers and to deceive us and win accolades from media villains. We all know how Wallace double-teamed Trump during Tuesday's debate. No reason to get into all that again. We all know how Wallace only asked questions of former VP of Joe Biden that would allow him to look moderate, and questions of Trump filled with misinformation about the very fine people hoax and the like. This is what the liar Chris Wallace said on Thursday, quote, "Here's what happened. We began the first segment on the Supreme Court. They each got their 2 minutes, and they both obeyed in that particular case. And then Biden started to answer a question, and the president started interrupting him," Wallace said. He bears the primary responsibility for what happened on Tuesday. He is flat out lying. He's flat out looking into the camera, looking Fox News viewers in the eye and lying. The proof is in the video of the debate, the transcript of the debate. It's all right here, and what you see is that Chris Wallace is a liar. What you see is that Joe Biden interrupted Trump 6 times before Trump interrupted Biden. What's more, and this is important, Chris Wallace himself interrupted Trump 3 times in the first few minutes of the debate. So not only is Chris Wallace lying when he says Trump started, he's also lying when he lays the blame for what the debate devolved into on Trump. For it was Biden and Wallace who ran the debate off the rails, who set the tone, who interrupted Trump constantly before Trump interrupted anyone. As far as John Roberts, what a breathtaking liar he is. What a preening deceiver and manipulator he proved himself to be. "Will you denounce white supremacism?" he asked of Kayleigh McEnany. She said, "Here are nearly a dozen examples of the president condemning white supremacy, including yesterday." Roberts said, "Why won't you denounce white supremacy?" During the briefing, Roberts demanded a definitive and declarative statement without ambiguity or deflection. As the person who speaks for the president, does the president denounce white supremacism and groups that espouse it in all their forms? So McEnany fires off all these examples of the president doing exactly that, including yesterday when Trump told Roberts' own reporter wife, in one voice, "Our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy." Nevertheless, it went on and on like this, with Roberts denying the White House and Trump have denounced white supremacy. It was like a Monty Python sketch. And he concludes, "Fox News is not your friend," 3 times. In case anyone cares, this would have been a big news story because I believe it is the last such report before the November the 3rd election. The U.S. economy added 661,000 jobs in September, and the unemployment rate fell to 7.9%, indicating that the economy continued to add jobs even as coronavirus infections rose across many states. Economists had forecast an addition of around 800,000 jobs and a decline in the unemployment rate to 8.2% from 8.4%. So Friday's figures missed on job creation, but beat on the unemployment rate. And I believe that the unemployment rate of 7.9% is exactly what it was when Barack Obama was reelected in 2012. Let's see what J5 Killer has to say. Reassuring, a week of Trump COVID drama, triumphant return, rapturous rally, second debate trouncing. So much for the Biden campaign. Seriously, this election is going to be a full spectrum trouncing of Joe and the Dems. They need to figure out something quick because there is no stopping this train. The Hanging Chads had tweeted, "Don't let the media blackpill you. They smell blood in the water and want to demoralize. Don't let them. Only listen to people that can officially make statements on Trump's behalf. The amount of stories with anonymous sources they've gotten wrong since 2015 is in the hundreds. And I guess I'm guilty of that myself, because I quoted from the Washington Post, which I believe is the leader in unattributed sources. Oh, more from Dave Bautista. Yeah, okay. So moving on. Oh, let's talk about Breonna Taylor. Are we ever going to know what happened that night? I rather doubt it. But Breonna Taylor's family got $12 million. That's what happens. Trayvon Martin's family got a huge chunk of change. They all get. George Floyd's family. I didn't repeat this on Twitter because I thought it might be, in bad taste. But the tweet was, when your family member gets ventilated by the cops, and there was a picture of Willy Wonka, is it? Holding up the golden ticket with a big smile on his face. From the Mail, lawyer for cop charged in George Floyd's killing. No, I don't want to go to that one first. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend said she opened fire on cops during no-knock warrant before changing his story, according to now indicted officers' testimony revealed in secret grand jury recordings. About 20 hours of audio from the grand jury proceedings related to the Breonna Taylor case was released on Friday. It comes a week after Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, whose office led the investigation, announced no criminal charges were brought against officers. Officers who had a no-knock warrant, it's not true, testified that they knocked 3 times and identified themselves before they breached her apartment. It's a key issue because the officers said they opened fire after Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fired a gunshot at them. Walker has said he didn't know the men who burst into the home were police. Brent Hankinson, the cop charged with wanton endangerment, told investigators that Walker initially said his girlfriend was the one who opened fire. Walker later said that it was he who opened fire. So what we're hearing is, oh yes, it's a big stitch up, like the Mueller report. Release the full Mueller report or whatever. Well, it's the purpose of a grand jury to indict people or not indict people. And a lot of things are said during grand jury investigations, which could be untrue or irrelevant. And that's why they're typically not released, certainly not in full. But this gives BLM and its Antifa buddies an excuse to say that this is all a big cover-up, but the Attorney General is black. Yeah, okay. He's skin folk, but not kinfolk. That is the line about the Attorney General. And it's a curious thing about that. You may have noticed this going back to Trayvon Martin, that they run with one photograph. They run with one photograph that puts the deceased in the best possible light. Now, everyone takes an enormous amount of photographs today. They put them on Facebook. They send them to their friends. There are a lot of photographs. And so here's a picture of Breonna Taylor, who doesn't really much resemble the woman in the photograph that we have seen. Cameron, a Republican and the state's first black AG, has acknowledged that he did not recommend homicide charges for the officers involved, adding that the grand jury had the responsibility to bring additional charges if it believed they were warranted. The Kentucky governor, Louisville's mayor, and even a member of the grand jury itself had called for the proceedings to be released, increasing the pressure on Cameron. In the end, it was the judge overseeing Hankinson's wanton endangerment case who ordered the recordings to be entered in the court file, making them public, after the grand jury's decision not to charge the officers with Taylor's killing angered many and set off renewed protest. Oh, the looting, the burning, the killing. Yeah, renewed protest. The material released on Friday does not include juror deliberations or prosecutor recommendations or statements, none of which were recorded, according to Cameron. The officers told investigators that they banged on Taylor's door and announced themselves from 30 to 90 seconds before using a battering ram to enter her apartment. Taylor's boyfriend maintains he did not hear officers announce themselves. Well, either he is lying or he was well away. He was well away on some substance or other. We knocked on the door, said police, waited, 10 or 15 seconds, knocked again, said police, waited even longer, said Lieutenant Sean Hoover. So it was the third time that we were approaching. It had been like 45 seconds, if not a minute. And then I said, let's go, let's breach it. Detective Miles Cosgrove, one of the three officers who fired at Taylor, told investigators that a neighbor came out during that time and yelled at Officer Hankinson to leave Taylor alone. He said the neighbor yelled something about leave her alone. There was some girl there. Cosgrove also told investigators that officers had been told that they were approaching the house of a soft target and that they should use our maturity as investigators to get into the house. Cosgrove said that during the time they were knocking on Taylor's door, it went from gentle knocking to forceful pounding as they yelled police. According to grand jury recordings, Detective Jonathan Mattingly got shot as soon as he leaned inside the apartment. You don't hear very much about that, the policeman getting hit first, because it is not relevant to the narrative. Let's move on to another colossus of BLM. A lawyer for cop charged in George Floyd's killing argues that all four officers and their attorneys were assaulted by violent rioters at a September court hearing in a bid to get their trial moved to a different county. Attorney Thomas Plunkett, who represents former officer J. Alexander Kuhn, filed a memorandum in Hennepin County on Thursday in another attempt to move his client's trial to a different county. He claimed that the attorneys and their clients were harassed by violent rioters on their way to and from the courthouse on September the 11th, and that at least one attorney was physically assaulted. Attorneys and defendants were harassed upon arrival and departure from the courthouse, wrote Plunkett. The riot following the September 11th hearing shows that it is not safe for the participants if the trial is held in Hennepin County. Attorneys for the other three former officers, Derek Chauvin, Tao Thao, and Thomas Lane, previously filed similar venue requests for their clients as well. How many white policemen out of this four did we have? Is it one? And Derek Chauvin, who is he's the lead bad guy, doesn't he live with a Hmong woman or some sort of Asian woman? Doesn't seem like a very white supremacist group of people. Okay, let's talk about the NBA. And this is delightful to read. Some good news. Some good news for a change. Dylan Gwynn writes, one would think that having the American sports world's most popular athlete playing in Game 1 of the NBA Finals would equal impressive ratings. Well, one would be wrong. One would, in fact, be very wrong indeed. Instead of posting the good, if not great numbers that the NBA should have drawn for a Game 1 Finals clash, including with millions at home on lockdown and LeBron James, he's the king, you know, on the floor, the NBA saw a catastrophic drop in both ratings and viewership. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the opening game of the series between the Los Angeles Lakers and Miami Heat brought 7.41 million viewers to ABC, the smallest audience for the finals since at least 1994, when total viewers began to be regularly recorded. The previous low was 8.06 million for Game 3 of the 2007 NBA Finals. The game, which took place about 4 months later than the usual start date for the NBA Finals, was down by about 45% in total viewers versus the U.S. audience for last year's Finals opener between the Golden State Warriors and Toronto Raptors. The two conference finals series that wrapped up last week were down a collective 35% year to year. The NHL's Stanley Cup Finals series, also delayed by several months, was down by more than 60% for NBC Sports. Major League Baseball has also struggled during its shortened season. Massive declines in viewership and ratings are nothing new for the NBA. Since the league restarted its season with a full embrace of social justice activism, the NBA has suffered huge drops in numbers, a counterintuitive development for a league that restarted after fans had been starved for sports for 5 months and much of the country was at home due to coronavirus. In early September, a Harris poll found that most fans were watching fewer games because the NBA had become too political. And I believe that Vox Day had a comment about this. Actually, this is from Outkick. The NBA took another L Wednesday. This time, the finals with the Lakers and LeBron James. 7.41 million viewers. The least watched finals opener since on record. Game 1 is down an unheard of 44% from last year's matchup, which featured a team from Canada. During last year's finals, tank job media members yelled, "One team is from Canada, and there is no LeBron." The NBA is tanking to never before seen depths. If LeBron and the Lakers in the finals can't save this collapse, nothing will. This is the best case scenario. Imagine these numbers when the Nuggets finally win the West and the media has to push that over the NFL. Compared to 2018, the last finals with LeBron, Game 1 is down 58%. That kind of slide is what gets TV shows canceled and showrunners chased out of business. Well, yes, it is an absolute disaster for the U.S. networks when there is a Canadian team in a sports final. That when the Toronto Blue Jays won consecutive World Series in the 90s, the ratings were terrible because Americans want to see American teams. So you had a Canadian team, Toronto Raptors, last year, which is just absolutely terrible for ratings. This year, they have the Lakers and they have LeBron James. So one would have expected a considerable increase over the year before. What could it be that is responsible for this collapse? Could it be that the majority of NBA fans are actually white, not black, and that they are absolutely sick of being lectured about how horrible they are and how they have to get down on their knees and stay down on their knees to endure lectures? Or how about people who care about sportsmanship? Let's see, when you have the Milwaukee Bucks saying, we're really bummed out about something that happened, so we're not going to leave our locker room for the game. Oh, you forfeit the game, right? No. We can't have a forfeit because that would be racist somehow. I mean, suppose they could have played the game. They could have, put pictures of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor on their uniforms or whatever. But no, they forfeited the game, but this wasn't counted as a forfeit because the BLM demon would not approve. Oh, yes, more on television here. And of course, you've heard that women have to work, 2-3 times as hard as men to get half the recognition. What about these women who never really accomplished anything? When are they going to get their due? This is from Ad Age. Netflix promotes Enola Holmes with statues of sisters of famous men. And who is Enola Holmes when she is at home? It's a series of young adult fiction detective novels by American author Nancy Springer, starring Enola Holmes as the 14-year-old sister of an already famous Sherlock Holmes, 20 years her senior. And that's exactly what I would expect to solve crimes. A 14-year-old girl. Because anything that men can do, women can do better. I've seen this scene where there's some black servant, because there were tons of black servants in Britain at the time of Sherlock Holmes, who is bitching out the Lord of the Manor because he's not interested in politics. Because that's the sort of conversation that you had between masters and servants in the time of Sherlock Holmes, with black women telling their masters, as they called them in Britain at the time, that they were immoral. Yeah, that sort of thing went on all the time. Netflix is placing statues of the sisters of famous men in cities around the UK in a campaign promoting its new series, Enola Holmes. The film debuted on the streaming platform, this week. Based on the novels of Nancy Springer, it stars Millie Bobby Brown, what a silly name, as a sister of Sherlock Holmes, played by Henry Cavill, and Mycroft Holmes, portrayed by Sam Claflin. The campaign, with creative by McPartlin Studio and production via Sketch Events, features a statue of Enola placed near Baker Street in London. It also includes monuments of the accomplished female siblings of other famous men, including Maria Mozart, sister of Wolfgang Amadeus. I saw that and thought, Maria Mozart. I know a little bit about Mozart. Nobody called her Maria Mozart. They called her Marianne, or if they knew her, they called her Nannerl. So this is not right. Maria Mozart. Frances Dickens, sister of Charles, Mary Hardy, sister of Thomas, and Princess Helena, sister of King Edward VII. I'm sorry, was King Edward VII a man of great accomplishment? He was a notoriously louche man in his personal behavior, and was beholden to a whole bunch of sketchy characters that he got money from. The reign of King Edward VIII was distinguished by, honors being sold. Membership in the House of Lords to the highest bidder. The campaign highlights that all the sisters achieved significant things in their own right. Did they now? But were not as well known as their brothers. For example, Frances Dickens was a talented pianist and singer who studied at the Royal Academy of Music under a former pupil of Beethoven. See, here's the thing. It was a commonplace in the 19th century, female piano virtuosos. There wasn't just Clara Schumann. There were many, many, many of them. So if Frances Dickens did not become a touring virtuoso, then this suggests to me that she was not all that talented. She was so gifted, the Dickens family prioritized her education over Charles, as they could only afford school fees for one child. This is very clever of them, blowing up their own argument. So poor Charles Dickens didn't get to go to school. His sister did. And guess who became the universally beloved best-selling novelist? That would be the man. It also points out that Maria Anna Mozart was a gifted harpsichord and forte piano player who toured Vienna and Paris. When playing alongside Wolfgang as a child prodigy, Maria would often receive top billing. But as she grew older, cultural pressures made it impossible for her to continue her career. Actually, in this case, she acceded to the will of her father, Leopold. Look, when Wolfgang and Nannerl toured Europe, it was a novelty act. It was very much a novelty act. Here you have a little boy and a little girl, and they both play the piano, and isn't that adorable? Princess Helena, meanwhile, was a founding member of the Red Cross, while Mary Hardy became head teacher of a school. I am bowled over by these accomplishments. Though many have praised the campaign, some Twitter users have been comparing the statues to Fearless Girl, the State Street Advisor statue that stands on Wall Street and this week was adorned with a Ruth Bader Ginsburg-style lace collar. Could this get even more cringe? You know about Fearless Girl? There's a famous statue, Wall Street, of a bull. And some years ago, a picture of a little girl, the kind of little girl who was obviously always running to teacher, pointing out that some boy is doing something he's not supposed to. And she's standing athwart the bull, which is not very good in terms of its symbolism, but it's entirely childish because, of course, little girls do not play the market, do they? Let's have a look at the chat here. Brandon Smith says the goal is to engineer hell on Earth with super elites running and minions at their beck and call with nothing in between. Anrun says he slept with a lot of women, even for a king. Yes, indeed. There was an old music hall number about this, and I always get this mixed up. I danced with a girl who danced with no, I got that bad. I danced with a man who danced with a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales. Yeah, that's how it went. That's the consanguinity principle there. DB Cooper says every one of those sales was less dishonorable than Meghan or Diana. Philip Daniel says musicians were viewed as servants. Indeed, they were, and up to the time they had to wear a livery. Up to the time of Beethoven, even Haydn had to wear the Esterhazy livery. Chocokin 666 Guerrilla Art Project smashed fearless girl statue. I do not recommend anything of the sort, although I must say that when I lived in Victoria for all those years, in front of the Save on Foods Coliseum, which is mostly a hockey arena, they have concerts there and the like. I can believe it seats about 6,000. There is one of the most hideous pieces of statuary I've ever seen. It incorporates concrete and metal. And it kind of looks as if Beowulf had attempted to make a time machine. That's what it looks like. And for years, I just had this fantasy of setting on a fire or blowing it up or, covering it with red paint, because I passed this thing thousands of times over the years. And every time I did, it was just like a dagger to the heart. It's just so hideous. Bring back Nancy Drew, says David Wright. Be careful what you wish for, because you don't want to think about what Nancy Drew is going to be like if Netflix brings her back. Remember what they did to Anne of Green Gables? Joel Gerke says they are methodically destroying the universities, the Boy Scouts, women's sports, professional men's sports, romantic love, sexuality. Oh, the food's poisoned too. Ann Run says basketball is my least favorite of the four major team sports, but shooting hoops in your backyard or the park will always be fun. Yeah, fun for you maybe, not if you're nearby. It's not so fun. I had to rank that up with a constantly barking dog or a crying baby. The sound of bonk, 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 going on for half an hour or an hour. George Floyd, the foreman, says ESPN has been solvent. Does it mean insolvent for the last 10 years, but still managed to stay on television? And that's because you're forced to take ESPN. Same situation in Canada, that if you sign up for a cable package, they will give you sports channels, whether you like them or not. Oh, Tampa Bay versus Dallas was not a good, sexy matchup for the NHL. Yeah, I don't know. Not really. I suppose you have, your heritage teams, the original six. The Rangers, the Bruins, the Blackhawks, and the Red Wings, right? But yeah, it's been teams that are not in what you might call traditional hockey places that have been winning the Stanley Cup. And again, hockey's supposed to be a Canadian sport, but the last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup was 1994. Brandon Clark says, "I like your tie. Yes, it's flags of the at the time of the American Revolution." Okay, so, yes, let's talk about OnlyFans. Now, a few weeks ago, there was a controversy which got surprising attention. No, what am I saying? Not surprising attention, because it's about porn and celebrity. So it got just as much attention as you might want to, as you might think. This young actress who made a film for Pornhub recently. And so she decided to go onto OnlyFans, and she made supposedly some stupendous amount of money. Bella Thorne, yes, from 20 days ago in LA Magazine, Bella Thorne apologizes for hurting sex workers on OnlyFans. I become sort of a connoisseur of the headline that 1 year ago would make absolutely no sense at all. Bella Thorne apologizes for hurting sex workers on OnlyFans. I hurt you, and for that I'm truly sorry, she tweeted, addressing the sex workers who used the platform and who felt her actions threatened their ability to continue doing so. I wanted to bring attention to the site. The more people on the site, the more likely of a chance to normalize the stigmas. There's stigmas? Really? Where are these stigmas? Where are they hiding? Where can I find these stigmas in allegations that she charged, in response to allegations that she charged customers for nude photos she did not intend to deliver? The New York Post reports that the offer may have come from a third party that merely purported to be Thorne's account, though the details remain unclear. I demand a grand jury investigation into this. One thing that is clear is that the film project that Thorne claimed to be researching will not develop as she had planned. She had stated that she was working with Tangerine and the Florida Project filmmaker Sean Baker on the forthcoming feature, but Baker has made it clear that he is not involved. I'm not attached to the project, he said. He had an initial conversation with Thorne about an idea. On that call, I advised her to consult with sex workers and address the way she went about this so as to not hurt the sex work industry. This has been the extent of my involvement. So much quoted in these stories attacking Bella Thorne for her thoughtless treatment of sex workers was a woman who calls herself Savannah Solo. And so I familiarized myself with her Twitter, and what can I say about her? She appears to be in her 20s, or early 20s, perhaps. I don't know. She's a cute blonde with very large breasts. She's a little heavy, but I'd say she's an attractive woman. Unfortunately, reading through her tweets, I found out that she's absolutely disgusting. And I don't want to be too graphic about this, but she associates with sex, let's say, certain bodily fluids or productions of the body that one wouldn't want to associate with sex, or that would be, off-putting, detumescent, one might say. But Savannah Solo is the big OnlyFans success story. She tweeted on September 30th, in January, I had nothing but debt to my name, and yesterday I bought a whole house with the OnlyFans money in my skank bank. I feel I can't thank everyone enough for liking me and wanting to support me. This has been the greatest honor of my life. And she has tweeted many, many pictures of herself in all of the different rooms of her house. And most recently, big picture of a couch, a sectional couch. Yes, this is an enormous sectional couch. Hey Siri, is it legally possible to get married to a sofa? There's a lot of cosplay. Twitter, she indicates a lot of cosplay, a lot of Star Wars. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of Star Wars. Just Star Wars. Oh, and Richard Spencer waded into the controversy on September 30th. This girl is like a 6, and yet you have losers paying her for what? Amateurish erotic photography? The thrill of her replying to your DMs with an emoji? I don't blame her, but I am totally alienated from the men who would facilitate this nonsense insanity. Savannah Solo responded, oh gosh, guys, the Nazi party doesn't like my boobs. Some emoji of face. What am I going to do? 9 question marks. How am I going to go on? 8 question marks. Okay. And there's the usual stuff where people are saying that, oh, here we go. I don't know who y'all want me to, y'all want me to repent to. God put me in this spot for a reason, so we're vibing. Maybe call Rahab the harlot and ask her what the protocol is. Yes, just the stigma, the terrible, terrible, terrible stigma. And some simp calling, I'll just say this person, Jedi Master Queenie. I second this statement. If I see anyone being mean to Savannah Solo, I will not hesitate to go to jail. And the sad thing is that I believe that she may be sincere, or sorry, this person, I don't want to misgender this person, may be severe about this. And there's a little video here, October 1st, of a mock computer. No, actually it is a computer, I guess. And there is Savannah Solo making a sad face, holding up a glass of wine, and her breasts are spilling out of her clothing. Where I'm at with the incels on this Bird app today. Incels. So men who are having sex with women pay Savannah Solo money for pictures and videos and emojis, sent us direct messages. I don't think she thought this through. Electric Suspense, or Pence Electric, or Electric Pence, or whatever he's calling himself these days, tweeted September 30th, there's going to be a lot of extremely bitter, depressed Zoomer girls in 10 years when the OnlyFans dream they were lured into never materializes, and all they have to show for it is online blackmail in the hands of a few thousand simps. Jail time is too good for these people. We're just going to have a crash due to an overproduction of supply, are we not? As has happened, everything from tulips to baseball cards. That if every woman in the world, or let's say not say every woman in the world, let's say 10 to 20% of the American female population under the age of 50 decides to get onto OnlyFans, or what will doubtless be its competitors. Of course, the thing that struck me as being odd from the start is that since everything which exists in digital form is stolen and presented somewhere on the internet for free, again, this model seems to have difficulties over the long term. But I suppose the greatest difficulty, as Electric Pence points out, is that this is going to blight the lives of an enormous number of women who think that they are living their best lives, whereas what they are actually doing is prostituting themselves. This guy is reading from an article. I read a lot from articles, then I comment on them. That's generally how this live stream works. Don from Beyond says, Trump had to play ball with pharma and let them develop a vaccine. I worry this may bite him on the behind if the shots prove harmful. Best to give people a placebo shot. Placebos work. This is unquestioned in the science. In fact, years ago, I was writing an article about, you remember the controversy about drugs being re-imported from Canada and how there was a crackdown on this from the United States? Well, I wrote a long piece for Chronicles about this, and I found out something interesting, that SSRIs are no more efficacious in the treatment of depression than 1, St. John's wort, or 2, placebo. No, let's Jogokin 666. I'm not going to get into the details. I'm not going to get into the details of this. Okay. Yo Mama says, I'm reading Anne of Green Gables right now. Okay. Let's move on to the book club here. And I am talking about today one of the most famous books written in the history of the United States, considered one of the great autobiographies. It is by Booker T. Washington. and it is called Up from Slavery. It is an autobiography, but it's not an autobiography in the sense that you might expect. What it is, it's a salutary lesson, or a series of salutary lessons that Booker T. Washington wrote this book. It came out in 1910. I suppose for the benefit of Negroes, as they were called then, and of white people who wanted to advance the Negro race, as Booker T. Washington calls it. It's a story of his life, and there's a long list of his accomplishments and of the praise that he got from many famous people. He's not showing off here, really. It's rather like, I spoke about Franz Liszt a few weeks ago, and Liszt was criticized for his, collection of honors, decorations, and the like. And Liszt insisted that he was doing this for the greater glory of art and for his homeland of Hungary. Booker T. Washington did this to uplift Negroes. Now, this book is not as exciting as the various autobiographies of Frederick Douglass, and one of the reasons being is that Frederick Douglass was writing a traditional autobiography, one which was not didactic in the way that Up from Slavery is, but also because Booker T. Washington was born in 1856, so thus he was only a slave for 9 years, whereas Frederick Douglass was born in 1818. So slavery ended when he was 47 years old, and of course, Douglass had famously escaped from slavery. So Booker T. Washington, well, let's go right to the very beginning here, okay? Let's go to the beginning. One of the things that's really admirable about this book is that its lack of oratory. This is very simply written. There are no purple passages. There's no grand flourishes. It is very matter of fact. Now, Booker T. Washington suffered terrible things in his life, but this isn't, this isn't a poor-mouthing book. He's not intending to give people the creeps by, wallowing in how much he suffered. But I'll just read right from the very beginning. It's a pretty simple story at the beginning, and there are many, many like it. I was born a slave on a plantation in Franklin County, Virginia. I'm not quite sure of the exact place or exact date of my birth, but at any rate, I suspect that I must have been born somewhere and at some time. As nearly as I've been able to learn, I was born near a crossroads post office called Halesford, and the year was 1858 or 1859. Modern scholars seem to pin this at 1856, as I mentioned earlier. I do not know the month of the day. The earliest impressions I can now recall are of the plantation and the slave quarters, the latter being the part of the plantation where the slaves had their cabins. My life had its beginning in the midst of the most miserable, desolate, and discouraging surroundings. This was so, however, not because my owners were especially cruel, for they were not, as compared with so many others. I was born in a typical log cabin, about 14 by 16 feet square. In this cabin, I lived with my mother and a brother and sister till after the Civil War, when we were all declared free. Of my ancestry, I know almost nothing. In the slave quarters and even later, I heard whispered conversations among the colored people of the tortures which the slaves, including no doubt my ancestors on my mother's side, suffered in the middle passage of the slave ship while being conveyed from Africa to America. I've been unsuccessful in securing any information that would throw any accurate light upon the history of my family beyond my mother. She, I remember, had a half-brother and half-sister. In the days of slavery, not very much attention was given to family history and family records, that is, Black family records. My mother, I suppose, attracted the attention of a purchaser who was afterwards my owner and hers. Her addition to the slave family attracted about as much attention as the purchase of a new horse or cow. Of my father, I know even less than of my mother. I do not even know his name. I have heard reports to the effect that he was a white man who lived on one of the nearby plantations. Whoever he was, I never heard of his taking the least interest in me or providing in any way for my rearing. But I do not find a special fault with him. He was simply another unfortunate victim of the institution which the nation unhappily had engrafted upon it at that time. Booker T. Washington makes much of the fact that many slaves were fond of their owners. As he points out, that the owners were fond of their slaves. For instance, nursing the slave owners' children, caring for the elder members of the family. And after slavery ended, many of the slaves who had been freed drifted back to the plantations where they had been enslaved and took on paid work. You will recall the stupid controversy about the movie Gone with the Wind earlier this year, that it's all preposterous. It's not preposterous. If you read Booker T. Washington's autobiography, you'll find out that the story of the plantation of the O'Hara family was a common one. So what did he look like, Booker T. Washington? What sort of impression did he make on people? Well, here's the description from the book from James Creelman of the New York World. This is after his famous Atlanta Exposition speech. He wrote, "There was a remarkable figure, tall, bony, straight as a Sioux chief, high forehead, straight nose, heavy jaws, and a strong, determined mouth, with big white teeth, piercing eyes, and a commanding manner. The sinews stood out on his bronze neck, and his muscular right arm swung high in the air with a lead pencil grasped in the clenched brown fist. His big feet were planted squarely, with the heels together and the toes turned out. His voice rang out clear and true, and he paused impressively as he made each point. Within 10 minutes, the multitude was in an uproar of enthusiasm. Handkerchiefs were waved, canes were flourished, hats were tossed in the air. The fairest women of Georgia stood up and cheered. It was as if the orator had bewitched them. And when he held his dusky hand high above his head, with the fingers stretched wide apart, and said to the white people of the South on behalf of his race, 'In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress,' a great wave of sound dashed itself against the walls, and the whole audience was on its feet in a delirium of applause." This book is called Up from Slavery. Now, he's not discussing his own, he is discussing his own rise from slavery, but he was a mere child when slavery ended. What he is talking about is the uplift of his people. That is the whole point of his book, that the Negroes have a great and essential part to play in American history. That given the slavery, given their poverty, and given their ignorance, they must take great strides, but they must take their own great strides. They cannot be pushed forward. And at the heart of Booker T. Washington's vision for the Negro future was a vision of education, not simply of book learning, as he says, but of manual instruction in agriculture and in industry. I'll get back to that shortly. But I want to give this is a well-written book. As I say, it's simple and direct, but I think much the better for that. He was educated in fits and starts. Now, he was put to work at the very earliest age in the cotton field, and then later, after emancipation, he worked in salt furnaces and then the coal mines. And this is terrible, terrible work. And he found out, to his distress, that since he had proved himself a valuable worker, with salt and with coal, that he was not going to be permitted to be educated, that he was too valuable to his family. But he learns things. He gets hold of a grammar book, a simple grammar book, memorizes the alphabet. He learns numbers on his own, and he picks up snatches of things. But he wants to go to school. The problem is that there were really no schools for the emancipated black slaves. So he hears of a school in Hampton, Virginia. Booker T. Washington came from West Virginia, near Charleston. He heard of Hampton, and he was determined to get there. He writes, perhaps the thing that touched and pleased me most in connection with my starting for Hampton was the interest that many of the older colored people took in the matter. They had spent the best days of their lives in slavery and hardly expected to live to see the time when they would see a member of their race leave home to attend a boarding school. Some of these older people would give me a nickel, others a quarter or a handkerchief. Finally, the great day came, and I started for Hampton. I had only a small, cheap satchel that contained a few articles of clothing I could get. My mother at the time was rather weak and broken in health. I hardly expected to see her again, and thus our parting was all the more sad. She, however, was very brave through it all. At that time, there were no through trains connecting that part of West Virginia with Eastern Virginia. Trains ran only a portion of the way, and the remainder of the distance was traveled by stagecoaches. The distance from Malden to Hampton is about 500 miles. I had not been away from home many hours before it began to grow painfully evident that I did not have enough money to pay my fare to Hampton. One experience I shall long remember. I had been traveling over the mountains most of the afternoon in an old-fashioned stagecoach when, late in the evening, the coach stopped for a night at a common unpainted house called a hotel. All the other passengers except myself were whites. In my ignorance, I supposed that the little hotel existed for the purpose of accommodating the passengers who traveled on the stagecoach. The difference that the color of one's skin would make, I had not thought anything about. After all the other passengers had been shown rooms and were getting ready for supper, I shyly presented myself before the man at the desk. It is true I had practically no money in my pocket with which to pay for bed or food, but I had hoped in some way to beg my way into the good graces of the landlord, for at that season in the mountains of Virginia the weather was cold, and I wanted to get indoors for the night. Without asking as to whether I had any money, the man at the desk firmly refused to even consider the matter of providing me with food or lodging. This was my first experience in finding out what the color of my skin meant. In some way, I managed to keep warm by walking about, and so got through the night. My whole soul was so bent upon reaching Hampton that I did not have time to cherish any bitterness toward the hotel keeper. By walking, begging rides, both in wagons and in cars, in some way, after a number of days, I reached the city of Richmond, Virginia, about 82 miles from Hampton. When I reached there, tired, hungry, and dirty, it was late in the night. I had never been in a large city, and this rather added to my misery. When I reached Richmond, I was completely out of money. I had not a single acquaintance in the place, and being unused to city ways, I did not know where to go. I applied at several places for lodging, but they all wanted money, and that's what I did not have. Knowing nothing else better to do, I walked the streets. In doing this, I passed by many food stands where fried chicken and half-moon apple pies were piled high and made to present a most tempting appearance. At that time, it seemed to me that I would have promised all that I expected to possess in the future to have gotten hold of one of those chicken legs or one of those pies. But I could not get either of those, nor anything else to eat. I must have walked the streets till after midnight. At last I became so exhausted that I could walk no longer. I was tired, I was hungry, I was everything but discouraged. Just about the time when I reached extreme physical exhaustion, I came upon a portion of a street where the board sidewalk was considerably elevated. I waited for a few minutes till I was sure that no passers-by could see me, and then crept under the sidewalk and lay for the night upon the ground with my satchel of clothing for a pillow. Nearly all night I could hear the tramp of feet over my head. The next morning I found myself somewhat refreshed, but I was extremely hungry. because it had been a long time since I had sufficient food. As soon as it became light enough for me to see my surroundings, I noticed that I was near a large ship, and that this ship seemed to be unloading a cargo of pig iron. I went at once to the vessel and asked the captain to permit me to help unload the vessel in order to get money for food. The captain, a white man who seemed to be kind-hearted, consented. I worked long enough to earn money for my breakfast, and it seems to me, as I remember it now, to have been about the best breakfast that I have ever eaten. So he finally ends up in Hampton, and he says that he presented himself before the head teacher for an assignment to a class. Having been so long without proper food, a bath, and a change of clothing, I did not, of course, make a very favorable impression upon her, and I could see at once there were doubts in her mind about the wisdom of admitting me as a student. I felt that I could hardly blame her if she got the idea that I was a worthless loafer or tramp. For some time she did not refuse to admit me, neither did she decide in my favor, and I continued to linger about her and to impress her in all the ways I could with my worthiness. In the meantime, I saw her admitting other students, and that greatly added to my discomfort, for I felt deep down in my heart that I could do as well as they if I could only get the chance to show what was in me. After some hours had passed, the head teacher said to me, "The adjoining recitation room needs sweeping. Take the room and sweep it." It occurred to me at once that here was my chance. Never did I receive an order with more delight. I knew I could sweep, for Mrs. Ruffner had thoroughly taught me how to do that when I lived with her. And then he explains how he eliminated all of the dirt, all of the dust from this room. And so the head teacher goes through it, and she can't find any. And she says, "I guess you will do to enter this institution." I was one of the happiest souls on earth. The sweeping of that room was my college examination, and never did any youth pass an examination for entrance into Harvard or Yale that gave him more genuine satisfaction. I have passed several examinations since then, but I've always felt that this was the best one I ever passed. The point of this story is that Booker T. Washington was gravely concerned that the Negroes of the time disdained physical labor. He thought that this was a self-defeating, a terrible attitude that would hurt them. And he was constantly, in his autobiography, he's constantly trying to impress the reader with the fact that if you make an impression on people by being able to do something better than someone else can, then you cannot be held back. Dignity of labor. He recounts that he met an old Negro who had taken from the Bible the idea that work was to be avoided because it was a punishment meted out to man at the time of the Garden of Eden. And I've often thought that myself. But let's see. During those 2 weeks, I was taught a lesson I shall never forget. Miss Mackey was a member of one of the oldest and most cultured families of the North, and yet for 2 weeks she worked by my side, cleaning windows, dusting rooms, putting beds in order, and whatnot. She felt that things would not be in condition for the opening of school unless every window pane was perfectly clean, and she took the greatest satisfaction in helping to clean them herself. The work which I have described she did every year that I was at Hampton. It was hard for me at this time to understand how a woman of her education and social standing could take such delight in performing such service in order to assist in the elevation of an unfortunate race. Ever since then, I've had no patience with any school from my race in the South which did not teach its students the dignity of labor. And this is why, of course, after many privations, Booker T. Washington became a teacher at Hampton, and then he was invited to start a new educational institution at Tuskegee in Alabama. And what there was a name and him. That was pretty much it. There was some property, some small property with rotting buildings on it. Booker T. Washington decided that buildings would be built. More than that, they would be built by the students of Tuskegee, with him taking part. because he reasoned, and very good reasoning, that they would more respect these buildings if they made them themselves than if the buildings were given to them. And so they built them. Washington describes with great pride how all but 4 of the many dozens of buildings at Tuskegee were built by the students themselves. And he describes the difficulty. He refers to the ancient Jews in this regard. He says, "The task before me did not seem a very encouraging one. It seemed much like making bricks without straw. The colored people were overjoyed and were constantly offering their services in any way which they could be assistance in getting the school started." And he does make bricks, a harder task than making bricks without straw. That money is raised, and Booker T. Washington pretty much drove himself to death, traveling America asking for money. That the colored people in the South gave money. Of course, they had very little money. They gave what they could. But it was mostly rich people from the North who gave money. And they gave a lot of money. Andrew Carnegie being one, the head of Sears Roebuck, gave another. Many prominent people did. But he taught through trial and error, learned how to make bricks. It was only on the 4th attempt, when there was great despondency over this, that it was successful. Now, Booker T. Washington was very proud indeed, and he mentions this in the book, that his own son had become a master bricklayer. And I think that the wisdom of Booker T. Washington is more relevant now than it has ever been. That there is a great pleasure to be had in making things with your own hands, to know that you are capable of making a contribution to the community, to know that your labor is valued by others, as in turn you value other people's labor. And these are lessons which have largely been lost. And so Booker T. Washington insisted that the students at Tuskegee, they had to work manual labor. They had to learn manual labor as well as take studies, because he thought the one was as important as the other. And he has some fascinating things to say about the state of Negro society during the time of Reconstruction and after. He writes, "The years from 1867 to 1878, I think, may be called the period of Reconstruction. This included the time that I spent as a student at Hampton as a teacher in West Virginia. During the whole of the Reconstruction, 2 ideas were constantly agitating in the minds of the colored people, or at least in the minds of a large part of the race. One of these was the craze for Greek and Latin learning, and the other was a desire to hold office. It could not have been expected that a people who had spent generations in slavery, and before that generations in the darkest heathenism, could at first form any proper conception of what an education meant. In every part of the South during the Reconstruction period, schools, both day and night, were filled to overflowing with people of all ages and conditions, some being as far along in age as 60 and 70 years. The ambition to secure an education was most praiseworthy and encouraging. The idea, however, was too prevalent that as soon as one secured a little education, in some unexplainable way, he would be free from most of the hardships of the world, and at any rate could live without manual labor. There was a further feeling that a knowledge, however little, of the Greek and Latin languages would make one a very superior human being, something bordering almost on the supernatural. I remembered that the first colored man whom I saw who knew something about foreign languages impressed me at the time as being a man of all others to be envied." And he has some very choice things to say about the ministry in this book. He writes, "The ministry was the profession that suffered most and still suffers, though there has been great improvement, on account of not only ignorant, but in many cases immoral men who claimed that they were called to preach. In the earlier days of freedom, almost every colored man who learned to read would receive a call to preach within a few days after he began reading. At my home in West Virginia, the process of being called to the ministry was a very interesting one. Usually the call came when the individual was sitting in church. Without warning, the one called would fall upon the floor as if struck by a bullet and would lie there for hours, speechless and motionless. Then the news would spread all through the neighborhood that this individual had received a call. If he were inclined to resist the summons, he would fall or be made to fall a second or third time. In the end, he always yielded to the call. While I wanted an education badly, I confess that in my youth I had a fear that when I had learned to read and write very well, I would receive one of these calls, but for some reason, my call never came. When we add the number of wholly ignorant men who preached or exhorted to that of those who possessed something of an education, it can be seen at a glance that the supply of ministers was large. In fact, some time ago, I knew a certain church that had a total membership of about 200, and 18 of that number were ministers. But I repeat, in many communities in the South, the character of the ministry is being improved, and I believe that within the next 2 or 3 decades, a very large proportion of the unworthy ones will have disappeared. The constant optimism in this book that things have gotten better and they will continue to get better. It's rather sobering reading this book to realize that the ambitions that Booker T. Washington had for Black people were eventually, they were not realized. That the latter views won out. For instance, W.E. Du Bois with his talented 10th. That again, Booker T. Washington thought that the Negroes should make themselves indispensable. Now, there would be a tendency today, and his legacy is very controversial because he is seen as an accommodationist. He is seen perhaps even as an Uncle Tom. But very wisely indeed, Booker T. Washington understood that the welfare of a minority depends on the goodwill of the majority. And Washington was ever keen to maintain the goodwill of white Southerners. And this he did. But in terms of things not changing, this passage is very amusing indeed. At the time I went to Alabama, the colored people were taking considerable interest in politics, and they were very anxious that I should become one of them politically in every respect. They seemed to have a little distrust of strangers in this regard. I recall that one man, who seemed to have been designated by the others to look after my political destiny, came to me on several occasions and said, with a good deal of earnestness, "We want you to be sure to vote just like we votes. We can't read the newspapers very much, but we knows how to vote. And we want you to vote just like we votes. We watches the white man, and we keeps watching the white man till we finds out which way the white man's going to vote. And when we finds out which way the white man's going to vote, then we vote exactly the other way. Then we knows we's right." Well, plus a change, as they say. The ever-optimistic Washington writes next, "I'm glad, however, that at the present time the disposition to vote against the white man merely because he is white is largely disappearing, and the race is learning to vote from principle for what the voter considers to be the best interests of both races." I should mention that Booker T. Washington was a very staunch Christian. He was a non-denominational Protestant, a great Bible reader. He read the Bible every day, and he would pray before each of his speeches. And he said that this practice never failed to be unavailing. But he has, Booker T. Washington spent a lot of time with the poorest Black people in America. And he was an observant man. And he learned a lot. And much of what he learned was not to his taste. And he thought that Black people would have to improve themselves. And I know this is a very controversial view now, but it seems to me as sound now as it was then. Here he has some comments on what you might call today bling. The common diet of the people was fat pork and cornbread. At times I have eaten in cabins where they only had cornbread and black-eyed peas cooked in plain water. The people seemed to have no other idea than to live on this fat meat and cornbread. The meat and the meal of which the bread was made, having been bought at a high price at a store in town, notwithstanding the face that all of the land all about the cabin homes could easily have been made to produce nearly every kind of garden vegetable that is raised anywhere in the country. Their one object seemed to be to plant nothing but cotton, and in many cases cotton was planted up to the very door of the cabin. In these cabin homes, I often found sewing machines which had been bought or were being bought on installments, frequently at a cost of as much as $60, and $60 was something of a small fortune in those days, or showy clocks for which the occupants of the cabins had paid $12 or $14. I remember that on one occasion when I went into one of these cabins for dinner, when I sat down to the table for a meal with the 4 members of the family, I noticed that while there were 5 of us at the table, there was but 1 fork for the 5 of us to use. Naturally, there was an awkward pause on my part. In the opposite corner of that same cabin was an organ for which the people told me they were paying $60 in monthly installments. 1 fork and a $60 organ. In most cases, the sewing machine was not used. The clocks were so worthless that they did not keep correct time. And if they had, in 9 cases out of 10, there would have been no one in the family who would have told the time of day, while the organ, of course, was rarely used for want of a person who could play upon it. Booker T. Washington believed that despite poverty, despite disadvantages, there were properties that one could be in charge of. For instance, cleanliness. There's a lot of talk about toothbrushes in Up From Slavery, and Booker T. Washington was the apostle of the toothbrush in the Black American South. Also of bathing. It may seem shocking now, but for most of these people, they never bathed, ever. And Washington was insistent that bathing was essential, that cleanliness was essential, the cleanliness of body and mind were essential. It was a great source of pride to him that at the time that he wrote this book in 1910, that only 1 graduate of Tuskegee had ended up in the penitentiary. You know, idle hands are the devil's helpmate, as the Bible tells us. And Booker T. Washington believed this firmly. And his educational philosophy was an expansion of this. Now, I suppose the highlight of Booker T. Washington's, well, actually, the 2 highlights, he ends the book with receiving an honorary degree from Harvard University, the first colored man to have done so, a Master of Arts, and a visit to the Tuskegee Institute by President McKinley, a man who Booker T. Washington greatly admired. Washington was friendly with a great many American presidents. But his speech, his Atlanta speech, one of the most famous speeches in American history, and I'll leave off with quoting some of it. 1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise seeking the material, civil, or moral welfare of this section can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success. I but convey to you the sentiment of the masses of my race when I say that in no way have the value and manhood of the American Negro been more fittingly and generously recognized than by the managers of this magnificent exposition at every stage of its progress. It is a recognition that will do more to cement the friendship of the 2 races than any occurrence since the dawn of freedom. A ship lost at sea for many days suddenly sighted a friendly vessel. From the mast of the unfortunate vessel was seen a signal, "Water, water, we die of thirst." The answer from the friendly vessel at once came back, "Cast down your bucket where you are." A second time, the signal, "Water, water, send us water," ran up from the distressed vessel and was answered, "Cast down your bucket where you are." And a third and fourth signal for water was answered, "Cast down your bucket where you are." The captain of the distressed vessel, at last heeding the injunction, cast down his bucket, and it came up full of fresh, sparkling water from the mouth of the Amazon River. To those of my race who depend on bettering their condition in a foreign land, or who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendly relations with the Southern white man who is their next door neighbor, I would say, cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down in making friends in every manly way of the people of all races by whom we are surrounded. Cast it down in agriculture, mechanics, in commerce, in domestic service, and in the professions. And in this connection, it is well to bear in mind that whatever other sins the South may be called to bear, when it comes to business pure and simple, it is in the South that the Negro is given a man's chance in the commercial world, and in nothing in this exposition more eloquent than in emphasizing this chance. Our greatest danger is that in the great leap from slavery to freedom, we may overlook the fact that the masses of us are to live by the productions of our hands, and fail to keep in mind that we shall prosper in proportion as we learn to dignify and glorify common labor and put brains and skills into the common occupations of life, shall prosper in proportion as we learn to draw the line between the superficial and the substantial, the ornamental gewgaws of life and the useful. No race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. It is at the bottom of life we must begin, and not at the top. Nor should we permit our grievances to overshadow our opportunities. To those of the white race who look to the incoming of those of foreign birth and strange tongue and habits for the prosperity of the South, were I permitted, I would repeat what I say to my own race: cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down among the 8 millions of Negroes whose habits you know, whose fidelity and love you have tested in days, when to have proved treacherous meant the ruin of your firesides. Cast down your bucket among these people who have, without strikes and labor wars, tilled your fields, cleared your forests, builded your railroads and cities, and brought forth treasures from the bowels of the earth, and helped make possible this magnificent representation of the progress of the South. Casting down your bucket among my people, helping and encouraging them as you are doing on these grounds, and to education of head, hand, and heart, you will find that they will buy your surplus land, make blossom the waste fields in your fields, and run your factories. While doing this, you can be sure in the future, as in the past, that you and your families will be surrounded by the most patient, faithful, law-abiding, and unresentful people that the world has seen. As we have proved our loyalty to you in the past, in nursing your children, watching by the sickbed of your mothers and fathers, and often following them with tear-dimmed eyes to their graves, so in the future, in our humble way, we shall stand by you with a devotion that no foreigner can approach, ready to lay down our lives, if need be, in defense of yours, interlacing our industrial, commercial, civil, and religious life with yours in a way that shall make the interests of both races one. There's much more in this speech. I'll leave it at that. The speech made a tremendous stir at the time, but black radicals attacked it, Garvey and Du Bois, and their counsels eventually won out. This is a magnificent book, and it is good to read an autobiography which is about a good man and not only a great man. One really feels ennobled reading it. And I've long thought that, of course, there is a national holiday in the United States for Black people named after Martin Luther King, and I don't think that he's suitable. Both Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington were great and good men. Martin Luther King was not a good man. He was a plagiarist, an orgiast, and an aider and abetter of rape. He did not have a noble mien. He had a sullen and ugly face, and I think that it's a shame that instead of Martin Luther King Day, there is not a Douglas Washington Day or Washington Douglas Day. Those are my thoughts on Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. So let's have a, Garvey was shipped back to Africa. Yes, he was convicted of fraud, as I recall. He mentions, Booker T. Washington mentions in his autobiography, meeting the explorer Stanley Livingstone, and questioned him closely about the conditions of Black people in Africa and coming to the conclusion that black people were much better off in America and that the return to Africa was not a good idea. Matt Beck says Up From Slavery is available on Audible. I'll just add so are two of James Burnham's books, The Machiavellians and Suicide of the West. Halpert, The Dignity of Labor, there is a lost concept. You know, this cliche that you hear, you know, that it's the NBA or prison. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. Or I suppose, you know, you get a government job. But if you can't get a government job, well, you know, anything less than that would be demeaning. Chogokin666 says, I like his writing style, direct. Yes. Josh Randall forgives, quotes, Booker T, I'll let no man drag me down so far that I may hate him. Okay. So that's the show for today and for this week. What is coming up culture-wise? Theater Thursday next week, Bill and Ted Face the Music. And the book next week, it's an American classic by Don Marquis called Archie and Mehitabel. Curiously, the fellow who illustrated it, the same fellow who had his own comic strip, George Herman, called Crazy Cat, he was what he called himself Creole, which was, a recognized race, if you will, at the time. But now he's been claimed as a great black artist, although he never identified as such. So I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live cast with a donation, very much appreciated at this time. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I'll leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.